In 2018, Ford made a big announcement to end production of all passenger cars in the US with the exception of the Mustang. They dropped the Fiesta, the Focus, the Taurus, and even the pretty successful Fusion to focus on SUVs and trucks. It seemed like Ford did this because people were losing interest in small cars and sedans. Today, sales of SUVs and trucks have grown to more than 80% market share, so clearly Ford made the right move, and it's what Doug DeMuro said in his video. Except, I don't think that they did this because they thought that this is what consumers would want. Instead, the decision was more or less driven by an effort to avoid government fines, which were on their way to becoming astronomical. General Motors and Stellantis paid hundreds of millions of dollars in fines for missing fuel economy targets, and this is when MPG targets were a piece of cake compared to what they are today and what they will be in a few years from now. From what I found, Ford was also on the hook for CAFE fines in 2017, or again, just 1 year before they announced that they would stop producing cars. However, Ford was able to settle this with future credits they earned in 2022. Now, you might be correctly thinking that a few $100 million in CAFE fines is just a drop in the bucket compared to their bottom line, but this was just the beginning. Missing the CAFE target by 10 miles per gallon today on just 1 million units would cost you around $1.4 billion in fines, which no matter what automaker you are, that's a lot of money. Ford was smart, or maybe the regulations were silly, because although Ford struggled to meet its fuel economy targets for passenger cars, they didn't really struggle all that much when it came to meeting fuel economy targets for trucks and SUVs. So, not only were cars and sedans less profitable, but since they were much more easily missing their fuel economy targets and incurring massive fines, they just didn't make any sense to keep around. The only companies that could continue producing economy sedans were the ones that produced highly efficient models, such as Honda and Toyota, which even then they've had to do it with some sacrifices. Keeping the sedan around for these companies has meant taking the fun out of them in order to meet these strict fuel economy targets, which is why the Camry and the Accord no longer come with a V6 option, which used to be a great selling point for these sedans. 20 years ago, a V6 option for the Honda Accord was available on nearly every trim as long as you were willing to pay for it. But in order to reduce the take rate of that option and improve the overall fuel economy average, it later only became available on the premium trims until it was finally discontinued. To get an idea of how bad it was getting, take a look at the Chevy Malibu. This was once a neat sedan that you could get with a nice V6, but in its final year of production, the only powertrain available for it was a small turbocharged 4-cylinder that produced just 160 horsepower connected to a CVT, which, by the way, is the same amount of power as a 20-year-old base model Honda Accord. Honda and Toyota's history of making fuel-efficient cars really has come in handy in recent years, and more recently their commitment to efficient hybrids has only allowed them to hold on to sedans even longer, as well as the internal combustion engine in general. The downside of this, though, is that the cost relative to crossovers has been a lot higher. With Toyota, for example, the Camry now comes standard with a hybrid powertrain and now has the same starting price as a RAV4, which just wasn't the case in the past. So here we have this idea that Americans just don't like buying small cars and sedans, but the reality is that fuel economy regulations have forced automakers to take away these small cars and sedans and have made the ones that were fuel efficient enough to stick around a lot more boring and a lot more expensive. So pricey, in fact, that you might as well just buy a more spacious crossover than a sedan. Now, hopefully you've noticed that crossovers seem to have some kind of an inherent advantage over sedans because they seem to be more immune to fuel economy regulations compared to sedans, and in fact, they very much are. Today, it's still possible to buy small crossovers and big crossovers, and many are available without hybrid powertrains, and some are available without small turbocharged engines connected to CVTs like the RAV4, for example. So where did everything go wrong? CAFE standards started in the late 70s with the goal of reducing oil consumptions with more fuel-efficient vehicles. It started in response to an oil crisis but has since evolved to address environmental concerns. Story aside, there were two standards. One was for passenger cars and one for light trucks. This worked fine until around the 1990s, where we saw the rise of an entirely new type of vehicle with the introduction of cars like the RAV4 and later the CR-V. This is of course the crossover, which is a cross between an SUV or a truck and a car. It has the unibody construction of a car, it uses the powertrain of a car, but it has the ride height and the ground clearance of an SUV. Regulators probably should have made a new category for the crossover, but instead they just lumped it into the light truck category. And as you can imagine, meeting fuel economy regulations were just a walk in the park for crossovers disguised as light trucks. Here's an example. The Honda CR-V and the Honda Accord are two similar vehicles built on a similar platform that use the same engine and transmission. One is a sedan and the other is a crossover. In the real world, the Accord gets 32 miles per gallon combined versus 30 for the CR-V. According to what I calculated, the 2025 CAFE fuel economy targets for the Accord is 51.5 miles per gallon and 43.1 miles per gallon for the CR-V, which uses the light truck formula. Okay, I know the numbers are confusing because NHTSA uses the outdated fuel economy test compared to what's on your sticker, but here's where I'm getting at. In the real world, Honda is showing us that the Accord using the same powertrain as the CR-V is only 7% more efficient than the CR-V, but according to NHTSA, it should be 19% more efficient, which is just way off from reality. Even the non-hybrid Civic hatchback is only 14% more efficient than the CR-V, and that's while being lighter, smaller, and while using a much less powerful engine. So with fuel economy standards being so strict for cars, automakers have been forced to kind of step away from the fun options like the V6 and the 2.0 turbos and focus on more efficient models, including hybrids, which happen to be a lot more expensive. Now, so far, everything I said has been about cars, and if you move over to the opposite end of the spectrum of trucks, you will notice that everything I said about cars also applies to trucks, because they too have difficulty meeting these fuel economy regulations, unlike crossovers. Fuel economy targets for small pickup trucks, for example, are so difficult to meet that even if there's a large target audience for them, manufacturers just won't build them. These targets for small pickup trucks are downright impossible or unrealistic to meet, at least when compared to large trucks. This is primarily why there's no small pickups in the US, even though companies like Chevy still build small pickup trucks outside of the US, like the Chevy Montana. The Ford Maverick is one of the smallest pickup trucks that you can buy today, and the only way Ford was able to bring this truck to market was by launching it with a hybrid powertrain as standard. And by the way, it's not that small of a truck, it's longer than a Honda Accord. Now when it comes to mid-sized trucks, they've seen their tried and true V6 powertrains replaced by turbocharged 4-cylinder engines, and full-size trucks have mostly seen their V8s replaced with twin-turbo V6s, hybrids, or in some cases fully electric models like the Ford F-150 Lightning. But moving on to arguably the worst part of the fuel economy standard was that starting in 2010, they started basing these fuel economy targets on the size of the vehicle, specifically the footprint, but more or less the size of the vehicle. The logic behind this was that bigger vehicles shouldn't be held to the same fuel economy standard as smaller cars, which sounds logical. However, the unintended side effect of this is that manufacturers could much more easily meet their fuel economy targets by simply making everything just a little bit bigger. For example, this chart right here shows the Honda Civic's CAFE fuel economy targets. On the bottom, you have what its actual CAFE fuel economy target is, and on the top, you have what its fuel economy target would be if it did not increase in size since 2013. The Civic got a size bump with the 10th generation in 2016 and the 11th generation in 2022. The HR-V is an even more interesting example because in 2022, it was moved to a larger platform, and in doing so, its fuel economy target for the next year actually went down, even though it should have went up. This just shows how much of an impact making larger vehicles can have on reducing fuel economy targets. This kind of just brings me back to small cars. I like small cars. They're efficient, they're easy to park, and they can still be nimble and very fun to drive. However, the fuel economy targets for small cars, just like trucks, was just too difficult to meet. The Honda Fit, for example, if it were still sold today, would need a fuel economy target of more than 60 miles per gallon. Yes, that's on the old fuel economy test, so really it's kind of in the high 40s, but that's still a really difficult number to meet, if not impossible, when you look at the Prius C, which couldn't even do that. Now, I don't want to deny the fact that crossovers have become more popular, because they have. They're much more spacious, they're easy to get in and out of, plus they're higher off the ground, so not only do you have better visibility, but it makes people feel safer. Driving is statistically a very dangerous thing to do, and if you're going to be in an accident with a large SUV or truck, which has become increasingly more common in recent years, you're going to want to find yourself or your loved ones in a larger vehicle like a crossover. So clearly there's many reasons why people would want a bigger vehicle like a crossover over a sedan, but the question is, do people actually want these bigger SUVs and trucks over sedans, or have they been kind of conditioned into preferring them because of how fuel economy regulations have changed the car market? You know, by taking away small cars and sedans and replacing them with big SUVs and trucks. Let me know what you think, and as always, thank you so much for watching. Your support has been strongly appreciated. I'll see you on the next one.